You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 269. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, author of How to Get On Podcasts, the podcast matchmaker, and CEO and founder of the MLG Collective. I'm excited to share the stories and life lessons of changemakers and authors with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac. Let's rewind back almost 200 episodes to number 79. I introduced you to Lewis L. Reed, and we had an incredible conversation. He is back with me today to talk about his newest children's book, Deuce's First Step. This is a book that is meant for children with incarcerated parents. It's meant for caretakers, teachers, people who care about these children so that we can understand what they're going through, their emotions, how we can support them, and to make sure that there isn't a stigma attached to these children because they don't deserve it. We had an awesome conversation. He's one of my favorite people, and we're talking all about what this book means to him, why he wished he had it when he was a child growing up, and what he hopes it's going to do for children throughout the United States. Hello, Lewis.
Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. So well.
It's been a few years since you've been on the show, and this time we
Yeah.
have you on video. So
Yeah, it's been a few years since I've been on the show, but not a few years since you and I have been in communication with one another. You're one of my favorite people, and not just all of the podcast world, but you're one of my favorite people in life. So,
you are buttering me up for a good episode.
yeah.
Last time you said that I was up your favorite with Michelle Obama. We were the two Michelles that are your favorites. So
Yeah. I think that still stands.
it should stand even more now at this point. I mean,
I would agree. I would agree with that. Yes.
can you reintroduce yourself to everybody, please?
Yeah, allow me to reintroduce myself. For those of you who do know me, my name is Lewis L. Reed. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lewis L. Reed. Please don't forget the L in between the Lewis and the Reed. My dad would have an issue with that. I am an author and an advocate. I did 14 years in federal prison. Was released from incarceration approximately 10 years or so ago, but who's counting? I springboarded my career in human services. From there, I went on to do local government work. I convinced the largest city in the state of Connecticut that they needed a government office for reentry affairs. I was the inaugural reentry director in Connecticut's largest city. We replicated that model throughout the country. From there, my career continued to elevate to go on to do national work, where I worked on a few bills to get a whole bunch of people out of federal prison. And as of today, I am the executive vice president of an organization called the Frederick Douglass Project for Justice, where we bridge the gap between people who are incarcerated and people who are in free society. I am also the chief executive officer of Decoded Story Lab, which is a documentary film company, and I like to consider myself one of Michelle's favorite people.
Oh, you are.
Okay.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
All right.
I talk about you all the time, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
I do.
I don't even hear my ears ringing. I can feel my heart burning. So,
I do. I talk about you on the show. I talk about you in my interviews. So I'm always chatting about you.
appreciate that.
Yeah. And you're a man who wears many hats, and not just the one that's on your head now, but every time I'm like, what are you doing now? Because you missed out the title of producer on the
Yeah.
Hulu show.
I forgot about that. Yeah. On Unprison with Kerry Washington, served as a social impact lead over there. And also I'm featured in two documentaries. One happens to be The First Step, alongside Van Jones, Kim Kardashian, and a few other people. And a recent release of a documentary that features me and two other advocates called When Does Freedom Begin as well. And I'm also a producer on that. I forgot all about that. Thanks for reminding me.
And then you're also a podcast host on Illmatic.
Illmatic podcast. Yeah. Illmatic podcast. It's my creative side. And so yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for
Yeah, I can just go through your bio. It's
yes.
all up here. I know it
Yeah,
all.
pretty much.
But your show is one of my favorites. So you need to revamp that and bring it back because it's
I am.
been on pause.
Yeah. Well, after the first of the year, we got some interviews set up and scheduled, and after the first of the year, we definitely will be back in action in full swing.
Okay, now let's talk about your newest book.
Yeah,
We'll get back to that one
yeah.
because it is so cute.
Thank you.
The illustrations are adorable. And
Yeah.
that probably sounds funny as we're talking about all of these serious things. I'm like, your book's so cute.
Yeah. So I wrote a book inspired by the work that we did on the First Step Act. For those of you who are in our listening and or our viewing audience, the First Step Act was a federal bill that we passed back in 2018. We convinced Congress to pass and then President Trump to sign into law that to date has released more than 45,000 people from federal prison. Let me also say this as well. For those of you who are like, wow, 45,000 people got released from federal prison. That is impressive. I think that what's equally impressive is that 87% of the people who got released under that bill did not recidivate. 87%. Now you have to consider that approximately 77% of people who do get released recidivate within the first 3 years. And so 87% of those people who got released on that 45,000 number have not recidivated. Let me also say this as well. Another 8% of the remaining percentage of those folks who got released were rearrested due to a technical probation violation. So it's not like they committed new crimes. They were probably fraternizing with people who were convicted of felony offenses themselves. They showed up to a appointment late, or so on and so forth. So I just wanted to just add that as well. But the book was inspired by the work that we did on the First Step Act. It was also inspired by my own life as well. And I was a child of incarcerated parents. I was a father who had children while obviously I was incarcerated. And I was just thinking about how in the United States of America, there are more than 6 million kids who are experiencing parental incarceration. Think about that. More than
It's
6
so
million.
many kids. And you know what? I want to bring up that I bet you
Mhm.
that listeners don't even know that they know a child. Because I personally know a child. And I'm not going to go into it
Mhm.
because, we don't want to expose this child, but
Mhm.
I know a child whose parent is incarcerated
Mhm. Mhm.
and sweetest little thing
Yeah.
ever. But, who does know? Who doesn't know? It's not something that we talk about. It's not
Yeah.
something that the child is going to openly talk
Michelle,
about.
I remember being so ashamed when my parents were incarcerated. I would make up stories. My mother, now you have to also keep in mind that, my mother was relatively young. My mother was super fly. My dad was super sharp. And I remember being so embarrassed when my grandmother, who was a registered nurse, would show up to school for PTA conferences and for the other school based activities that I had. Because number one, there was a generational disconnect there, right? Number two, my grandmother, relatively older, whereas my mother, far much more useful, far much more buoyant, etc. And the third thing is that my mother was an educator. And so I would make up stories like with my friends to say like, oh yeah, my mother is away teaching and my father was a military police officer, right? Because I was just so embarrassed about the notion of my parents being incarcerated. I'll tell you a very quick story. I was in the second grade and I had one of those can't sit still episodes. And I remember there was a teacher's aide. Her name was Miss Smith. She was a black woman and she had a jury carol. And I remember she pulled me out of the class. She pushed me against the wall and she put her finger this close to the bridge of my nose. And she was like, if you don't stop, you're going to be just like those kids that I read about in a paper. And I remember the feeling of wishing my mother was there to slap that jerry curl out of that woman's head. Because I knew how my mother felt about me, but I also knew how my grandmother put a premium on education. And so I couldn't go home and say, hey, grandma, this woman made me feel this way, and this is what it was that she did to me. But I
Mhm.
knew that if my mother was around, I knew that my mother would have protected me. And so just that experience in and of itself, that still sits with me. I was in second grade. That still sits with me. Here it is 30 plus years later. That in and of itself was something that I remember about my parents' incarceration. And so when I thought about the inspiration for this book, I thought about all of the kids who are in effect in the shadows of what it's like to have an absent mother or absent father due to incarceration. And I wanted to write a book for them. So the book is called Deuce's First Step. It follows this young man who wants to grow up to be an engineer. And he has all of these passions and he has all of this creative energy, but it's diminished when his father is incarcerated. And so Deuce is supported by his best friend. Her name is Scarlett. And Deuce discovers this program through the community center called the First Step program that's going to teach him these emotional literacy skills. He goes through the First Step program, and therefore he has this pivot moment. And I don't want to give it away because you're going to have to purchase the book in order to actually see what the end result of it is. But I think that it's a beautiful story about a child who, in effect, is like any other child that you probably see, that you probably know, and you want to nurture yourself. I think that every parent, every caretaker, every adult is going to see a version of someone that they know in Deuce.
And I think it's also important to have this book not only for parents, caretakers, teachers, for children of incarcerated parents, but also for other children who are exposed to they're interacting with children. I don't want to say exposed, they're interacting with other students who are going through this.
Mhm.
And they all know it's playground talk. It
Yeah.
it truly is.
Yeah.
I know because
No,
my
no,
kids come home,
yeah, no different than how it is water cooler conversations for adults, right? When
Right.
when there's a breakup in the office or something to that degree happens. Playground talk. Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I've had this conversation with my daughter because she came home and she said, so and so's parent couldn't come to the parent teacher conference because she's sick, and his dad's in jail.
Mhm.
And I go, I do know. So who told you that?
Mhm.
And then it's, oh well, so and so said it, and and I go, well, did somebody say this to him? Because then we're gonna have some issues.
Yeah.
And we have the conversation of, well, you don't single him out, you don't talk about it. It's none of
Mhm.
your business,
Mhm.
nor is it of anybody else's business. And you be kind to him because now you also know that there's something going on in his life.
Right. Right.
Period.
Yeah.
So I think it's
We
important for
we we all
so
we all
many.
we all need Mother Michelle's.
I'm probably very much like your mom in a way. Whether or not you're my child, I will
Yeah.
protect you. And
Yeah.
but it's important to have these conversations.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I know I remember back to our first conversation on this show that I had shared with you. I've never been exposed to, I've never been to jail, I've never been to prison.
Mhm.
I didn't know people who had.
Mhm.
And now I'm having this conversation with my 8-year-old
Mhm.
because she's already exposed to someone who, is related to someone. So these conversations are starting earlier, but they're conversations that need to be had.
Yeah, yeah, and the goal just doesn't stop with the production of the book, and so ultimately, what the goal is twofold. I want to put this book into the hands of 1 million children, free of charge, impacted by parental incarceration, and so that is ultimately the goal. Second is that we have, by the time this podcast airs, we have an animated series that's going to be releasing on YouTube in February, on February 7th, incidentally, which happens to be on my birthday. And so we're going to be releasing a 3-part animated series around Deuce's story on YouTube as a result of this. So there's going to be this uh, uh, fluidity, so to speak, of learning and interaction as a result of who Deuce is and what Deuce's experiences is.
I love this. I
Yeah.
love so we
Yeah.
know what inspired you, your own personal experience, but at what point did you go, you know what, I'm going to write a kid's book? I'm just going to do that because you're always coming up with something new. So at
Yeah.
what point, because you surprised me, you're like, hey, by the way, I got this book. What?
Yeah, so over the last 6 months, I just been having conversations with children in my own family. I have cousins who currently are serving federal prison time. I'm a surrogate dad, uncle to my younger cousins in lieu of my older cousins' absence. And I just been thinking about what it's like for me to put my younger cousins in a car and for me to bring them to an institution. What is that like for them to have to go into an institution, have this moment of what seems like normalcy, as relatively speaking, with their parent, and then have to leave? And then they have to go back into their respective silos. What is that conversation like for them afterwards, internally? What does it mean for to them when they have to only have a 15-minute call with their mother or their father? Because in prison or in jail, your calls are only, allotted to about 15. Like, what does that feel like when you're in the middle of saying, "Hey mom, hey dad, I got this report," or "This, guess what happened today?" And kids don't speak with message discipline, right? They don't have brevity on things. So by the time they get to the point, you're about that 14-second 59 14-minute 59-second mark. What is that like for them to be cut off in the middle of that? What is that like for them to hear every 5 minutes during the intervals on the telephone call, "This call is from a federal prison," to remind you of where you are? What is that like for them? And so I started thinking about that, and I was like, something, I do a lot of things that have been in and around the adult space, working on dignity for incarcerated women, helping people impacted in the reentry space. I've even have done some supportive work around juvenile justice, but I haven't done anything creative that is going to specifically speak to the needs and directly into the hearts and minds of children who've been impacted by this issue.
And it's so important. I've connected you with Nikia Hargrove,
Yeah.
and she was on the podcast earlier, and her book opens up with the memories of visiting her mom in
Mm,
prison
yeah.
and what that was like to see her be searched and to be searched herself
Mhm,
and then sit down and then have to walk away.
mhm,
And again, for her, it's been decades as
mhm.
well. These things stick with you,
Yeah,
and they're the memories that you don't want to have as your memories
yeah.
per se for your
I can tell
childhood.
you, Michelle, in the heart of every adult, there's a child that preceded us. I know in my heart, in my spirit, in my soul, there is always that 8-year-old child who's peeking through the curtains and afraid of Miss Smith and wanting somehow, in some way, shape, or form, my mother to come rescue me. And so when you think about Nakia, when she opens up her book with remembering her mother having to go to a prison visit, like that's that child that's still inside of her,
Hmm.
right? Like peeking out their head to see, like, is the coast clear? When does my it's all of those emotional complexities that kind of like come packaged in this adult frame that we have. But the fact of the matter is that all of us have something, whether you have been in an emotional prison when you were a child, whether you've experienced parental incarceration, all of us know what it's like to feel restricted, to have something about someone that we loved or even about ourselves diminished and restricted, and call it a prison, call it trauma, call it drama, call it whatever it is that you want to call it. But the fact of the matter is very real to some people.
Yeah. What do you hope will come of this book? What's your biggest hope, your biggest goal that comes
Look,
out of this?
I'm hoping one of several things. Number one, I want this book to be a national model on how we can address the emotional and sociological needs of children impacted by incarceration. I remember it was this when I was incarcerated. There was this trending topic because Sesame Street had introduced this Muppet whose parent was incarcerated, and it was trending and it was in vogue, and it was like, oh, Sesame Street is doing the Muppet, blah blah blah, and then it kind of like faded to black. Well, children don't fade to black; they
Mhm.
grow up. They grow up, and they grow up with those experiences. And so I want to have the experiences of these children to be front and center in the minds of every single person who cares about this issue and or who may not be thinking about it. That's the first thing. The second thing is I want to be able to produce creatively an animated series that's going to live outside of the 5 to 7 minute mark. The same way that we have, I don't know, your mom. I was going to say Teletubbies, but that was probably back in the '90s. Well, whatever the
Bluey,
yeah,
Bluey.
Bluey, yeah, Bluey, right? Whatever the current thing is.
It is Bluey
Okay.
still.
Okay. All right. So whatever as relevant as the current thing is, I want Deuce's story to be just as relevant. That's what the second thing that I want. And the third thing is that I want to remind people that when you incarcerate a parent, you incarcerate the child, you incarcerate a family. And for those of you who might be saying to themselves, well, people shouldn't do things to be incarcerated. Look, I'm the first person to say, hey, yes, we probably should look at decisions and drivers, so on and so forth. But I do think that there is some psychological and or sociological things that we can have a very, very lively discussion about how we apply criminal solutions to social problems.
Hmm.
And we need to be reimagining what public safety looks like. Public safety is not the absence of crime, but it's the presence of opportunity. Last I checked, 83% of women who are incarcerated either A, have been exposed to direct trauma, B, are in for non violent offenses, i.e., drug offenses, etc., and 3, 6 out of 10 in women who are incarcerated are either a mother or are a caretaker. So when you think about the drivers of of what leads to crime, so on and so forth, again, behind every person there is a story that contributes to the decisions that people make. And
Absolutely.
I want to be able to bring those stories front and center. And at the very least, even if you look past the parent, it's hard to look past the eyes of a child.
And we shouldn't.
Yeah, we never.
It shouldn't be hard. It should be never. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. Where can everybody buy this incredible book?
Yeah,
You know what? Before we even get to that, let's talk about the illustrations and how you actually created this.
yeah, yeah.
Because you're just like, oh, here we go. I'm just going to create this, not,
It,
children's book with these pictures, and poof, it's out in the world.
so I was very involved in like everything from I wanted it to be culturally and ethnically representative of the world as I see it. I'm an African American man. I'm mixed. But the people by whom are disproportionately impacted by the issue, they're black, brown, and poor white folks. And I wanted to have the first installment of this book, and you guys are getting exclusive here. The reason why I said first installment of this book is because we plan on breaking out a series. This book is going to be a trilogy, and so the first portion of the book, first installment, follows Deuce. The second portion, installment of the book, is going to follow his friend Bree, and the third portion of the book is going to follow both Deuce and Bree and reunite in both of their parents, them with both of their parents. But I wanted the book to, in effect, when I was thinking about the illustrations and was thinking about like Deuce, I imagine this kid who looks like an everyday child that you may see. He has glasses. I wear glasses sometimes. He has this kind of like curly, woolish hair. I used to have curly, woolish hair when I was far much more youthful. And Deuce wants to be an engineer, right? Like, and I remember when I was a kid and I used to be, you know, just dreaming and thinking. I used to want to build things. I didn't know it was called an engineer at the time, but I just wanted to build things. I wanted to produce things. And so when you see Deuce, you see a reflection of who I am, and who I think myself to be as a child and how I saw myself as a child. That's who you see in Deuce. And the people around Deuce are the folks by whom I just drew some inspiration from. Miss Jackson, who is the social worker that Deuce connects with. Miss Jackson, the inspiration for Miss Jackson is from Jessica Jackson, who I have long worked with, who's the CEO of Reform Alliance. Scarlett, who is Deuce's best friend, happens to be Jessica Jackson's daughter,
Oh,
who was with us. Uh, she was just a little baby at the time, but she was with us when we were on the Hill fighting for the First Step Act. Deuce's father, who makes a cameo appearance in the book, was inspired by Van Jones, and so there's a lot of inspiration that you'll see when you actually read the book.
oh, I love that. Now it's even more meaningful.
Yeah,
I'm like, I
yeah,
don't know these people, but I know who they are.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
that's awesome. So they're going to promote the heck out of this book too, right?
They should.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I better see it on Van's Instagram.
yeah.
I love that. That makes it more special. It
Thank you.
really does.
Thank you.
And it's a great book. It's adorable.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
cute. Yes.
Thanks. Thanks.
All right. Now, where can everybody find the book?
Yeah, you can find it wherever, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Barnes and Noble. Wherever you find your books at. It's on Google Play. It'll be on Apple Play in by the time this broadcast airs, or Apple Store, whatever. You can find it on Apple, Google, Amazon, and Barnes and
Just
Noble.
Google it.
Just
You'll find
Google it.
it.
Just Google it. Yeah, Deuce's first step. Deuce's first step.
And where can everybody find you and follow you?
Anywhere on social media, at Lewis L. Reed. You can just Google me, and I'm certain that there's something that's going to pop up. You can find me on Instagram at Lewis L. Reed, Facebook at Lewis L. Reed, Twitter at Lewis L. Reed. I even got a TikTok now, and
Oh boy.
I resisted TikTok. I don't do. I just post. I just post on there. I resisted TikTok for the longest, but I'm on TikTok as at Lewis L. Reed. I'm on Blue Sky as Lewis L. Reed. Anywhere where you can where you're
I
social.
need to go follow you on both of those because I don't think I am yet, but I'm on the TikTok.
All
The
right.
TikTok. It's
Yeah,
not even the
leave
TikTok, but
TikTok. We sound like parents.
we sound like old people, which we
Yeah.
are. So we have to be there though.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And congratulations on this new book. And we're going to get it out to all of these children.
I
It's
appreciate
just, it's going to be done.
We are. We are.
Friends, I encourage you to go grab a copy of Deuce's First Step. Grab a copy, grab an extra one for your library to donate. But remember that it's going to make a difference in a child's life. And that is the most important thing that we as adults can do to help build empathy in our own children and to really ensure that a child has memories that are happy from their childhood. And by letting a child know that they're not alone in any of this and that they're supported, that's the way that you're going to make some new memories for children. Grab a copy of Deuce's First Step everywhere you buy books and go back to episode 79 so you can hear the rest of Lewis's story. Thank you for supporting children, for supporting the authors that come on my show. And I'm so grateful for the stories that are shared with all of you so that we can all build more empathy to make it a better tomorrow.